Oprah Winfrey interview in her Netflix series, Harry and Meghan. Now, Meghan is fiercely fighting to have this case tossed, hoping that the judge will dismiss it without a trial.
The moment the courtroom doors closed, the illusion shattered. Not cracked, not shaken, shattered. This wasn't just another legal hearing. This was the day control slipped through perfectly manicured fingers and hit the marble floor loud enough for the world to hear. Everything was supposed to be routine, predictable, managed. That's how these things always go when you have elite lawyers, unlimited resources, and a reputation built on never appearing cornered. But inside that courtroom, something shifted almost instantly. The air felt heavier, conversations softened. Even the smallest sounds, the shuffle of papers, a chair adjusting, a quiet cough, felt amplified like the room itself knew something big was about to go wrong. Then the questions began. Not dramatic, not shouted, calm, precise, surgical, and that's what made them lethal. Each point raised from the bench landed like a quiet hammer, tapping at the foundation of arguments that had been presented to the public as airtight. But in that room, under real scrutiny, they didn't look airtight. They looked fragile, complicated, overworked, like a story that had been polished too many times and was now starting to peel. You could see it at the defense table. The confidence that once looked effortless now had edges. Papers were flipped too quickly, notes checked twice, a pause here, a stumble there. Nothing catastrophic on its own, but together it painted a picture no PR team could blur. This was not dominance. This was damage control happening in real time. Then came the moment people would replay online for days. A phrase from the opposing side, simple, sharp, almost casual, slicing through months of preparation. The defense was compared to a spread of excuses, laid out like options at a buffet, hoping something might satisfy. It was the kind of line that lawyers hate and the internet loves. Easy to understand, easy to repeat, impossible to forget. You could feel the temperature change. Some observers tried to keep straight faces, others looked down, pretending to write. But the shift was undeniable. The powerful, polished legal machine the public had been told was unstoppable suddenly looked human. And not in a charming way. In a wait, are they actually losing control? Kind of way. And then the unthinkable, admissions. Small, technical, carefully worded, but still admissions. Acknowledgements that certain things hadn't been presented perfectly, that some interpretations might have been stretched, that the strategy wasn't as seamless as advertised. In elite legal circles, that's blood in the water. Because the brand wasn't just built on fighting, it was built on never looking wrong, never appearing unsure, never conceding ground, even an inch. But there it was, inch by inch, slipping away under fluorescent courtroom lights. And she wasn't even there. The woman whose image had been engineered for years around control, composure, and narrative mastery was miles away while the story unfolded without her. No carefully timed entrance, no poised expression for photographers, no visual reminder of confidence, just absence. And absence in moments like this gets filled with speculation. Was she avoiding the optics? Was she advised to stay away? Did she believe the team had it handled? No one knew, and that mystery only fed the fire. Because outside those courtroom walls, the world was waiting. And the second whispers escaped, they didn't travel, they exploded. Clips, quotes, dramatic summaries. Within hours, the hearing had transformed from a legal proceeding into a global spectacle. People who had never read a court document in their lives suddenly had opinions. Strong ones, loud ones. Memes formed faster than official statements. Commentary channels dissected every pause, every phrase, every facial expression described by those inside. The narrative was no longer in legal hands. It belonged to the crowd now. And crowds don't care about technicalities. They care about moments, optics, vibes. And the vibe was clear. The untouchable image had been touched. For years, criticism bounced off like rain on glass. Lawsuits were framed as noise. Disputes were spun as misunderstandings. Every challenge seemed to dissolve before it could stick. But this felt different. This wasn't a headline that could be ignored or an interview that could redirect the story. This was a public setting where the performance wasn't scripted and the questions weren't pre-approved. And in that environment, the polish wore thin. Back in California, phones reportedly didn't stop buzzing. Advisors scrambling, messages flying, emergency conversations about messaging, timing, response strategy. Because silence can be powerful, but it can also look like surrender if it lasts too long. And the silence stretched. No immediate clarification, no confident rebuttal, no smiling photo to reset the mood, just a vacuum. and vacuums get filled with doubt. Inside industry offices far from the courtroom, a different kind of tension began. Executives who once saw the brand as bulletproof started asking quieter questions. Not dramatic ones, practical ones. Is this stable? Is this predictable? Is this still safe? Because partnerships built on image depend on one thing above all: trust in the narrative. And when that narrative starts wobbling in public, risk calculations change fast. But the most dangerous shift wasn't happening in boardrooms or on social media. It was happening in perception. For the first time, the idea that everything was always under control started to feel like a performance. And once the audience sees the wires, they can't unsee them. What played out in that courtroom wasn't just legal pressure, it was pressure on the myth itself. The myth of flawless strategy, of always being 3 steps ahead, of turning every setback into a victory speech. Because sometimes there is no speech. Sometimes there's just a quiet room, hard questions, and the uncomfortable realization that reputation doesn't argue back, lawyers do. And on that day, they didn't look invincible. They looked rattled. And the world noticed. The real damage didn't explode all at once. It spread, slow, quiet, and far more dangerous than a single bad headline. In the days after the courtroom shock, the loudest noise was online, but the most important reactions were happening in silence. Behind glass walls and polished conference tables, conversations turned cautious. Emails that once carried excitement now carried hesitation. Projects that had been moving forward suddenly needed review. Calls that would have been returned in minutes took days. No dramatic cancellations, no public announcements, just distance. That's how reputational tremors really move, not like a lightning strike, but like a crack in a foundation. At first, you barely see it. Then one day, you realize the wall isn't straight anymore. For years, the image had been built on strength through adversity. Every controversy had been reframed as resilience. Every criticism became proof of unfair treatment. It was a formula that worked because it relied on one key belief: that the storyteller was always credible. But courtrooms don't run on storytelling, they run on scrutiny. And scrutiny is merciless. The moment doubts about consistency, accuracy, or presentation start entering the conversation in a legal setting, they don't stay contained, they bleed outward. Because if something doesn't hold up under legal questioning, people start wondering where else the story might wobble. That question, what else doesn't add up, is the one no public figure ever wants trending. Suddenly, old interviews were being replayed with fresh eyes. Past statements were examined, not by loyal supporters or loud critics, but by neutral observers who had never cared enough before to look closely. And neutrality can be harsher than hate, because it isn't emotional, it's analytical. Moments that once sounded inspiring now sounded curated. Personal history that once felt relatable now felt selectively framed. The shift wasn't that everyone turned against her overnight. It was that more people started watching without automatically believing. That's a devastating transition for a brand built on emotional connection. Meanwhile, inside the inner circle, pressure mounted. Advisors faced the impossible task of regaining control of a narrative that had slipped into too many hands. Issue a statement, and it risks drawing more attention. Stay silent, and it looks like there's no defense. Push back too hard, and it feels defensive. Say too little, and it feels evasive. Every option carried risk. And in high-profile crises, hesitation can look like guilt even when it isn't. The personal toll reportedly grew heavier too, because legal stress is one thing, public humiliation is another, but the combination, legal vulnerability mixed with viral mockery, creates a unique kind of isolation. The same spotlight that once felt empowering starts to feel interrogative, like the world isn't watching to admire, but to catch the next misstep. That kind of pressure seeps into everything. Professional relationships grow tense. Friendly advice turns blunt. Loyalty gets tested not in grand betrayals, but in small hesitations, a delayed endorsement, a softer show of support, a shift in tone that says, "We're not as sure anymore." And then there's the partnership factor. When two public figures are linked not just romantically but professionally, reputational waves don't hit one shore, they hit both. Stress multiplies. Strategic disagreements surface. One side may want to fight loudly, the other may want to retreat quietly. Neither option feels safe. Because fighting risks escalation. Retreating risks looking defeated. In that space, even strong alliances feel strained. Publicly, the silence continued. No explosive rebuttal, no emotional interview, no dramatic reveal to flip the script, just careful distance while the storm spun on its own momentum. And that absence of spectacle, ironically, made the moment feel heavier. There was no distraction to redirect attention, no new project launch to change the subject, just the lingering question mark. And question marks are sticky. The long-term impact doesn't come from one bad week. It comes from the slow erosion of certainty. When producers, publishers, and partners start building backup plans just in case. When enthusiasm becomes caution. When meetings include the phrase, "Let's see how this plays out first." That's when you know the shine has dulled. None of this guarantees collapse. Public figures have recovered from worse. Reinvention is always possible. But reinvention requires one crucial ingredient: trust that the next chapter will be more stable than the last. Right now, stability is exactly what feels uncertain. Because the courtroom moment didn't just challenge a legal argument, it challenged the perception of control. And once the public senses that control is slipping, every future move gets interpreted through that lens. A delayed project isn't just a delay, it's fallout. A quiet month isn't just rest, it's damage control. A new appearance isn't just publicity, it's image repair. The narrative lens has shifted from admiration to assessment. And that's a hard lens to escape. In the end, the most painful part of public humiliation isn't the laughter or the headlines, it's the loss of inevitability. The sense that success is automatic, that setbacks are temporary, that everything bends back into your favor eventually. That illusion cracked. Now, the future doesn't look guaranteed. It looks negotiable. And in the world of image, power, and influence, uncertainty is louder than any accusation. Because once people start wondering whether the magic still works, they start watching to see if it doesn't. And that kind of audience is the toughest one of all.